They were walled up in a cell for a year for science. This is how the experiment ended. Hello friends, I think it's no secret that the main goal of space explorers today is to send a human being to Mars. With technology advancing by leaps and bounds, this goal is likely to be realized in the near future. However, it's always worth remembering that knowledge and experience have come out not only through huge financial investments, but also through the work of scientists. Most importantly, those who are willing to sacrifice their lives for the sake of science. And today we go back half a century to highlight a little more about the feat of the people who, thanks to their endurance, were able to lay the very first brick on the road to exploration of the Red Planet. Also, if you have not done so already, please subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell to get inspired by these real-life stories every day. Now, back to the story. At the beginning of the space age, scientists in the USSR were convinced that after the first launch of an artificial satellite and then a human spaceflight, interplanetary missions were not far off. Therefore, before they had time to celebrate Gagarin's feat in 1962, they prepared a new project to explore Mars, which was divided into 4 stages. The flight itself was to take about a year, but the main question was what to do with the life support of astronauts, because according to experts, a crew of 3 people would have to take with them 11 tons of provisions. And that would only include food, water, and air. At first glance, the task seemed impossible. Soon the scientists decided to set up their own personal ecosystem on board where food would be freeze-dried and water and air would be recovered from waste. And so it was that in 1967, scientists began an experiment to simulate a human flight to another planet in a specially built pressurized chamber. But only on paper did everything look perfect. In reality, scientists were well aware of what the astronauts would experience. So the selection of volunteers, which took almost half a year, was, to put it mildly, a very complex process. Only 6 months later, after a long selection process, they had managed to put together a team of 3 from hundreds of volunteers. Among them were 24-year-old mechanic Boris Ulybyshev, 29-year-old biologist Andrei Bosko, and 31-year-old spaceship commander German Manovtsev, a doctor. The interesting thing is that the project was conducted in strict secrecy, so no one, not even their relatives, knew about the planned experiment. The participants, 2 of whom had wives and small children, even had to lie to their loved ones about going on an expedition to Siberia, and there would be no way to get in touch during all this time. Even with all this, each of the participants could withdraw from the experiment without explanation, all because the word brutal was too mild a word to describe it. The size of the living quarters was 4 by 3 meters, and half of the space was taken up by the cooker, fridge, exercise bike, and communications desk. It is not hard to guess that the boys had no comfort to look forward to. Steel walls, a tiny bathroom, 3 shelves for sleeping, water from purified urine and condensation, a monotonous menu, and above all, there was a fan blowing air, the noise of which was comparable to the noise in an underground train. You had to live in such conditions for a whole year. The subjects literally found themselves in a survival show in inhuman conditions, where they were filmed by pre-installed cameras. Doctors, engineers, and lab technicians were watching, constantly challenging them to do more and more. At first, things were going surprisingly well. There was hardly any free time in the astronauts' daily routine. The testers exercised, washed, ate breakfast, did tests, medical examinations, self-massage, and much more. Free time was limited to 2 hours. Only then could they listen to the radio and pick up a book. At first, they talked to each other a lot, and at night they dreamt of the usual joys of life, the sunshine and the bird singing. In addition, they could play chess, but that was only in the beginning. By then, it was already day 76 of the experiment. A little later, a greenhouse was docked to the living quarters, where early vegetables were to grow as well as grass, which was rich in vitamins. Apart from the variety in the diet, the extra 5 paces of space was seen as a luxury, and the idea of growing something in the cell greatly fascinated everyone involved. But it got worse from there. Conflicts were inevitable. In addition, the observers of the experiment deliberately created a strained relationship between Commander Manovtsev and the other 2 members of the crew. The first was to conduct constant medical examinations and biological experiments. At first, this was the case, but then his team united against the commander, thereby creating conflict. The captain in fact had to exist alone in a small cell with 2 opponents, and it was very difficult. Imagine yourself in his shoes, living in a confined space with 2 enemies. When the captain heard about the birth of his daughter, in a wave of disagreement, he even wanted to leave the experiment, but he stayed anyway. But that was not all. Boris Kulibyashev, a mechanic, soon became the object of a spat. The fact was that he suddenly began to lose weight, and the organizers decided to take 1/3 of the vitamins from the other cosmonauts and give it to the sick man, provoking considerable conflict that almost ended in a fight. But this was not all the astronauts had to endure. In the 3rd stage of the experiment, the subjects were given a 10-day emergency. The temperature was deliberately raised to 30 degrees and humidity to 90%, and oxygen levels were drastically reduced, while hot food and water were excluded from the diet. Apathy, constant thirst, and nightmares awaited the team. Looking at them, it was hard to recognize in these people the tough guys who had come in at the beginning. But understanding the importance of the experiment, none of them even asked to reduce the workload, much less get out of this hell. It was then that interesting things happened. Instead of fueling conflict and fighting over food, the 3 exhausted and barely alive men banded together and decided not to criticize each other. Having overcome this ordeal too, as spring arrives, the cosmonauts' feelings have become more acute. While negotiating with the group, Andrei Bosco heard an unfamiliar female voice, and from her flirtatious mannerisms, he realized she was pretty. After a while, he accidentally discovered a tiny slit near the greenhouse porthole through which he saw the object of his adoration, and even handed her a letter, the text of which was something like this: "I'm not writing to you out of boredom, but out of a desire to meet you. Soon I will be out of the cell and will be able to get to know each other better." A few days later, Andrei received a reply from Violetta. The unsanctioned correspondence continued even further. Being aware of it, the authorities deliberately did not interfere in their love story. They play up the situation as if the girl was waiting for a man from an expedition to Mars. In reality, though, there was only one wall separating the couple. The grueling 365-day experiment was about to end. During this time, the participants had struggled but managed to adapt to the harsh living conditions, and Commander Manotsev was even able to remove a cyst behind his ear on his own right in the hermetic chamber. Unfortunately, a year in confinement took its toll. Although the testers regularly applied their theoretical knowledge and practice, overall their intellectual level dropped to a catastrophic level. They came out of the cell like children who did not really understand what was going on. Today, it is known that the participants went on to work at the same institute, but interestingly enough, they did not communicate with each other at all. Such was the psychological burden of their imprisonment. As for the results, the experiment provided the scientists with invaluable knowledge, after which even a new field of science called cosmic psychology emerged. Since then, during crew selection, much more attention has been paid to the compatibility of the participants. In spite of all of this, Andrei Bosco can be called the most successful experience, as after getting out of his cell, he finally met Violetta, the woman he'd been living with for the rest of his life. The pair have even published a book together called A Year in Stargazer, describing events you won't find out about anywhere else. At the end of the research, the participants should have been awarded the titles of heroes in the USSR, but for some unknown reason, this never happened. However, the heroes were not upset, as they admitted that their decision to participate in the experiment was not made out of a desire for fame, but in order to make a huge step towards exploring Mars. As a result, the experiment paved the way for a whole new direction in space science. Today, the boys' exploits form the basis of similar research all over the world. Although so many years have passed since then and no one has set foot on Mars, this challenge offers hope that it will happen soon. All this is a credit to 3 ordinary volunteers who have agreed to endure any challenge in order to bring their country closer to a historic achievement. A country that no longer exists. Would you be able to do something like that? Feel free to comment. That's all for today. Like the video and talk to you soon. Bye. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider sharing it with someone who may find it interesting. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one.